In our previous episode, I explained how to set up a simpler telescope called the altitude azimuth, or the alt-az mount. Easy, right? Not too much complexity to it, and great for visual observing. There is a second type of telescope mount called a German equatorial mount. Equatorial mounts are a little bit more complicated to set up, but they're much more capable, particularly if you want to get into photography, which we will cover in an upcoming episode. So let me show you how to set up a German equatorial mount. It has the same three basic components: a tripod, the mount itself, which holds the electronics and gears, and the optical tube, which is what most people think of as a telescope. Okay? First, the tripod. That's the tripod. Now, with an alt-az mount, you can set that up pointing pretty much anywhere. An equatorial mount is different. It has to be what's called polar aligned. What that means is it must be pointing towards the celestial pole, which for our purposes is pointing towards north or pointing towards the star Polaris. To be accurate, Polaris, the star Polaris, is a little bit off due north. So you wouldn't want to point it exactly at the north celestial pole. You want to align it on Polaris. Okay, now that requires that you know the night sky, for one thing. Polaris is pretty easy to find, but there are any number of free apps that are planetarium apps that will show you the night sky. Most of them have the capability, a compass capability, to hold the phone or iPad up to the night sky. It'll align and show you where Polaris is. Now, I'm here in a studio. From here, I can't tell which direction is north, but I'm going to pretend that north is that way. Okay? Now, if you take a look at, if you can bring it into the tripod here, most tripods, so you have to set the tripod and the mount and everything up facing north. Most tripods will have some kind of indicator, okay? Usually a pole. All right, this one had a pole in it. I took it out because I do it somewhat differently. But it will have a way of saying, point this north, okay? So we're going to pretend that north is over there, all right? And I have it roughly pointed north, okay? Now, depending on what you're doing, impacts how accurate you need to be. If you're just going to visually observe, this is probably accurate enough, although more accurate is better. The more accurate it is, the easier it will be to find objects, particularly if you have a manual telescope. Computerized telescopes are a little different. Most of them are computerized these days, but that requires a somewhat different setup that we'll cover in a future episode. All right, so here's our tripod, okay? We have it roughly pointed north. Next thing is the mount. Equatorial mounts tend to be heavier and more complicated than alt-az mounts, okay? All right. You want to do the same thing here. The equatorial mount, you want to do basically the same thing that you do with the alt-az mount. You have to align it and make sure that it's securely attached, all right? To securely attach it, again, the tripod has what's called an accessory tray or a leg spreader. It does two things. It holds accessories, mostly eyepieces, but it also makes sure that the legs are fully spread, and it helps stabilize the telescope. All right, so one of the things you want to do is just tighten it up. Now, again, you do want it tight, but you don't need to over-tighten. Okay, there's a tendency to do that. I tend to over-tighten. You can actually break things if you do it too much. Or you can make it impossible to take the thing apart. Okay, now you can see, I don't know if you can catch it on the camera, but I didn't have the legs fully spread. That's what the leg spreader does. It makes sure that the tripod is fully spread so that the telescope is stabilized, okay? so it doesn't fall over and you don't get that movement while you're trying to observe, which will throw your alignment out. Okay, so now we've got tripod set up, okay, accessory tray set, the mount is attached, okay. You want to make sure also, this is really critical with a German Equatorial mount. You want to make sure that the mount is level, okay. With an Alt-Az mount, it's nice, but it's not absolutely critical, all right. But because the German Equatorial mount is so much more precise, it has to be level. So again, most mounts will have a level built into them. If they don't, just grab a level from your garage. And again, there are iPhone apps that will do leveling. And again, if you can bring the camera over, all right, you can show them. You can see this one, we did this already. So this one you can see, it's level. Okay. Thank you. Okay. The next thing is to attach the actual optical tube. Okay, and again, that's a little bit different. So let me do that. And again, just like with the Alt-Az mount, the critical thing is getting the finder scope correctly aligned. If you don't do that, the whole thing's a waste. You'll never find anything. All right? This is your basic optical tube. Okay, this particular one is one of my favorites. It's what's called a refractor. Refractors are nice. They're small, and they have nice, sharp, clear views. Okay? And as always, any optics, you want to handle them carefully. All right? Even on an inexpensive telescope, the optics are precision optics. Okay? If you drop it, you can break it or knock it out of alignment. All right. Okay? So you attach the optical tube. Okay. Now, the critical thing, as I said, is to get the finder scope aligned with the main telescope. As I said in the video with the Alt-Az mount, the worst thing to do is to set up your telescope for the first time at night in the middle of nowhere when you can't see anything. Set it up during the day. Align the finder scope during the day. Do it a few times. Practice setting it up and taking it apart. If you do that, particularly aligning the finder scope, you'll spend your nighttime observing, not getting frustrated. Okay? Aligning the finder scope is really pretty simple. And again, I'm in a studio. I can't do it here. And the manual for the telescope will explain it. But all you do, get a recognizable object centered in the main telescope. All right, I have an eyepiece attached. You want to find something at some distance, okay? Not too close, and something recognizable. Minimally a few hundred feet away. If you can, do it like a quarter mile away. That's hard to do in Ashland. We have more hills than people realize. Something recognizable. So for example, a plant or a tree branch is not good. They all look the same. What's good? Maybe a person, if you've got a buddy with you, just have them walk a few hundred yards away and zero in on them. A street sign, a license plate, something that's recognizable. First, get it centered in the main telescope. So you would put the license plate, okay, look in the eyepiece, and once it's centered in the main telescope, okay, then you go to the finder scope. Now, there are different types of finder scopes. The one that I happen to like. It's a non-magnifying finder scope. So whatever you're seeing with your eyes is what you'll see through the finder scope. But it has a red dot in the center. So you can center it. So let's say you take a license plate. Get the license plate centered in the main telescope first. Then get it centered in the finder scope. The finder scopes all have adjustments, up, down, right, left. Once you have the same object centered in both things, then you're good to go, at least for basic visual observing. You see the moon, you want to look at it through the telescope, center it in the finder scope, it'll be there. But if you don't do that alignment, You're wasting your time. You'll never find anything. That's what happens. People don't set this up properly. They get frustrated. They take it out for the first time at night, and they waste hours trying to figure it out. They don't see anything, and then the thing sits in the closet. All right? Set it up during the day. Set it up 2 or 3 times so you get practiced with it. Align the finder scope. Once you've done that, you'll have a lifetime of enjoyment. All right, now, a German equatorial mount also requires what they call balancing, okay? That requires putting on counterweights. You don't have to balance an alt-az scope. You can, but you don't have to. But a German equatorial mount, you have to balance it, okay? If you don't balance it, you can break the telescope, and you have to put on a counterweight to do that. Because the way these things move, if you don't have the counterweights attached, the telescope can literally go flying. All right, it'll fall over, the optical tube can hit the mount, okay, and you can destroy it, all right? So what you have to do is balance, and you have to balance it in 2 directions, all right? First, you attach your counterweight. The counterweight bar has something called a toe protector on it. It's there for a reason, because just in case you don't tighten up the counterweight and the counterweight goes sliding, the toe protector stops it and stops this 11-pound weight from hitting your toes. So I happen to know roughly where this thing goes. All right, here. Okay, so you move it up about there. See what it did? Okay. Put on your toe protector. Trust me, your toes will appreciate it. Okay, you have to balance it in 2 directions, all right? First thing you do, get it roughly pointed correctly. For polar aligning, okay, if you're just going to do visual, getting it visually aimed on Polaris is probably accurate enough. You can get what's called a polar alignment telescope, which is just a small telescope that you actually put in the mount, and you get Polaris in it visually. I actually have what's called a polar alignment camera. This will give you really precise polar alignment, but you only need to do this if you're going to do photography, which is another episode. Okay? All right, first thing, I'm going to balance it this way. All right, now what you want is when I let go of it, it should stay in position. It might do that now, but it's probably not going to. Okay? That's out of balance. Since it tilted towards the counterweight, I want to move the counterweight a little bit towards the telescope. Now this should probably do it. Okay? Nope. Still out of balance. Okay? Now you see now it's too heavy towards the telescope. So you want to move the counterweight back. All right, that's much closer. We're getting there. There you go. No hands, Mom. But you see, it's not locked, but it's staying in position. All right, now you lock it. You want to balance it in another direction also, this way. Okay? You have another, these are your declination knobs. Now, very likely when I release this is why you always want to be careful. When I release this, probably the telescope is going to go down like that, so it's not balanced. There you go. Okay? It's too front heavy. So I need to slide the telescope back. Okay? After a while, again, you practice with it. You do this a few times. You get a sense. Some people put markers on it. This is probably still too far forward. All right, there you go. You see, it's still too front heavy. And probably still. Yeah, okay, still too front heavy. All right, let's move it serious. All right, now you see it's too back heavy, so it needs to come forward a bit. Also, this is no fun to do in the dark. All right, you set this up during the day. All right, that's getting better, but it's still too back heavy. So we just move it forward some. Still a little back heavy. It doesn't have to be utterly and absolutely precise, but the better you do it, the better your results will be. A little forward heavy, so we just move it back a bit. That moved it back a little too much. This is why some people put markers on it. Still a little forward heavy. One last, like I said, sometimes putting some WD-40 in there is good. Okay. That's pretty good. That's a little back, that's too back heavy. One more time. That's pretty good. All right, it's a little forward heavy, but you see, and sometimes a little off is good actually, because it'll engage the gears a little more. I could move it back a squidge, but you see, it's unlocked right now, no hands. All right, that's basically balanced. It's a little bit off, okay? And that's essentially it. All right, now you would, of course, rotate it back like this. Okay. And that is how you set up a German equatorial mount. As I said, it's a little more complicated than an Alt-Az mount, but it's a little more capable. The critical things: set it up for the first time during the day. Practice with it. Do it 2 or 3 times. Align the finder scope. If you don't do that, you'll never see anything. All right, and then you're pretty much ready to go. Now, most telescopes these days are computerized. That requires a little bit additional setup, and that is for another episode of Ashland Astro. See you then.